Hey everybody, what's up? This is Dan. Just checking my levels here. I'm going to be doing some paint over for art camp and critique and discussion for probably an hour. Then I'm going to take a break, have dinner, probably check out E3, and then come back and do some more after that. So I'll be doing about an hour now, and then I'll come back and I'll do a couple more hours later. I know I've been meaning to do these daily. It's just lots of stuff's been going on, so I'm sorry that I keep doing these big long streams as opposed to smaller, more spaced out ones. Yeah, so I'm looking at this piece here, which is by. Let's take a look here. I gotta jump on the forum real quick. Load this up. This is by John Manor, and says, "This is a 3-hour, 30-minute imagination sketch I did. Probably the best image I've done so far, and I'd love to take it to final, but it seems that anything I do at this point just destroys the image. The idea is to have a creature that transitions in texture. The top, eyes, nose is a rough surface texture, while the bottom, cheeks, chin is a smooth texture. Here are some of the things that I'm having a problem with. Tightening up the details on the top of the head, taking a black and white sketch to a color final. So I'm going to adjust the two of those and also just give some basic criticism for how to take this forward. First off, in terms of looking at this thing and figuring out what it is, there's a certain point in your image where making up stuff is fine. We all start at that point. You can just kind of scribble around and find something that's pleasing, go from there. But basically, once you get to a certain point and you know what's going on in the image, it's time to start pulling in either reference of what kind of materials you're painting so you know how to accurately paint them, or even just ideas of, okay, what is this thing, some kind of narrative, is it a creature, is it a dude wearing a mask, what's going on. I'm going to go based off of what I read this as, because I don't know what your intention was necessarily, so I'm going to go by what I first saw, and hopefully that's something similar. I'm going to assume this is a humanoid creature. I'm going to assume everything on the face is a face and he's not wearing a mask over like a smooth face. And because it's a creature, automatically when I'm looking at this based on the textures you're using and the way you've mapped out the face, it feels like some kind of weird toad or frog. It's got some features that are kind of similar to like a bullfrog and also even like a sunfish that has those big huge mouths, little eyes, and that like silly kind of smile mouth. But I'm going to basically refer to a horned toad. If you know what those are, I'll pull an image up real quick. I'm going to look at a horned toad for the top, and I'm going to do that. And then on the bottom, I'm going to reference a sunfish as well as a bullfrog's puffed up mouth, because their mouth puffs up when they croak. And those are the two things I'm going to be looking at. So, I'm going to get into this. And yeah, we'll see what happens. So, I'm going to leave my chat open. I know that this is just for people that are in art camp, but if anyone has any questions or they want me to talk about anything in specific while I'm doing this, feel free to type them in the chat and I will do my best to answer anything. But if not, once I go into render mode, as always, I might get a little quiet and kind of get in the zone and just try to figure this out. So, one thing about this creature that automatically feels a little strange to me is this mohawk thing, because it's just kind of like it's almost like he just stuck a quarter in his head or something. It's just this very rigid circular disc. It doesn't look like it's growing out of his head, it just looks like it's stuck in his head. So I'm going to look at the ridges that are above the eyes of a horned toad, and I'm going to kind of make this more like that, more like it's a ridge that's growing out of his head, as opposed to just like this disc that's been stuck there, kind of lodged in. So I'm going to make it catching light here, and then as it goes up, I'll have it gradiate into shadow a bit more. So basically what I was saying earlier, if I can reiterate, When you're sketching around, it's okay to not know what you're doing for 95% of the time. You can just scribble and hope something looks good and just draw for drawing's sake. But when you're getting to the point where you're going to finish the image, you kind of need to know what it is you're drawing, at least to some degree. So for me, like I said a minute ago, this is now a creature who is a humanoid kind of toad dude, and that's where I'm taking it. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have known what I'm rendering, and I wouldn't have been able to accurately finish it and make it look convincing. You kind of have to buckle down what exactly it is that you're painting, and really just pull in appropriate reference based on that. Because otherwise, you can just keep making tons of mistakes because you're not going by any kind of standard. You're just kind of painting. So when you're just painting and you don't know what you're painting, it's easy to get everything wrong because there's no kind of test to see what's right. You're not pulling from any like visual library in particular. You're not really like going by any kind of animal archetype. So I'm gonna nail this down based on Toadfish Man. So if there's no questions in the chat, I apologize. I'm probably going to get very quiet. There should be some reflected light on these lips, so I'm going to do that. Hey, Marjorie. In the chat. But yeah, once you have an idea of what it is you're going to be drawing, then you kind of have to look at the materials. I'm not saying copy things. I'm not saying lay things in. I'm just saying, understand that if this is, my version of it is this toad man, the scales on a horned toad, they look a certain way for a certain reason. So I want to reference those and get the patterns right, get the textures right, really get the feel of that creature right. So that's what I'm going to do. They've also got those little eyes that are kind of set in under all this scaling and, multiple lids and all that stuff. So I feel like that's a good fit for this creature. But if it's another creature, this crit still applies. Just look at the creature that you want it to resemble and pull information in from that one instead. I'm not saying make it literally a horned toad. I'm just saying look at how the things on that creature work and understand that they evolved to look that way for specific reasons. So the more stuff you pull from it, the more believable this is going to be that it actually exists, because it's going to look like actual evolved traits that other animals have. That's the big thing that really sells like successful creature design in movies and stuff like that, especially everybody, when Avatar came out, was freaking about all the designs in Avatar because they're like, oh, it's so, why everything's so believable. It feels like this big, world that actually makes sense, and that's because they painstakingly went and researched, evolutionary traits of different things, and they took underwater evolutionary traits and brought them into a jungle setting. But it felt uniform because all the things that are in that movie are actually stuff that exists in the ocean that they're just brought up to this, more densely atmosphered planet. But, everything in there, it's all stuff from like jellyfish and barnacles and bioluminescent plankton. So they didn't make anything up. They made up the design and the general shape and the general idea. Then they reinforced it with actual nature to make it more believable. I'm also going to say that just having the texture on the top and not bringing it down at all is kind of a mistake, because then it makes it look like he's wearing a mask that just kind of sits on his nose and under his eyes. So I'm going to bring a couple scales down into the softer part to just show that it is a transition, that that very membrane-like cheek surface. It's very smooth, very puffy. That might be underneath all of his scales. So, like, you know, the soft part that inflates down here is going to have less scales because it needs to be able to stretch and go in and out and expand. So less stuff on the surface makes that easy, so it evolved to do that. But around the edges, it needs to go back to that protective coating because, you know, he needs his jugular protected, he needs his eyes protected, he needs his skull protected. So down at the bottom, I'm going to do a few kind of creeping scales that are coming up from his jugular. And down underneath the eyes, I'm going to do a couple scales that are creeping down from that armored top of the head. Just to show that this is a gradual exposure of that skin, and it's not just popping out. The nice thing about this dude, actually, that I would highly recommend, because he's so, I don't mean this in a negative way, I'm just saying because the shapes of this dude are so simple. He's basically just a ball, and then this thing that's on his head. The best thing you could do to, number one, do a really good study, and number two, make a very, very powerful illustration, is to actually just buy some Sculpey for $5 at the local art store or craft supply store, and just sculpt this dude out of clay. And then literally set up a light on him and make sure you absolutely nail the way the light falls. Nail all the cast shadows. Just do it really, really easily. The simpler something is, the easier it is to sculpt just by default. So not doing that for this piece or similar pieces that might be in your portfolio is kind of a disservice because, you know, you can make a very striking image with this if the light was absolutely perfect. You know what I mean? Like nothing sells a shape sitting in three-dimensional space faster than having accurate lighting. So you should totally try that. If you go forward with this piece, I've actually got some Sculpey. If I crit it a second time, I might sculpt it out, but it really wouldn't take long to sculpt these shapes, that's all I'm saying. All you basically need is like a needle and a fork, and you could do everything on here. So I'm going to zoom in real quick to the eye and really set this in space. I'm going to give him an upper lid above the eye that's catching some light, having protruded out a little bit. Again, referencing this from the horned toad, who has basically 3 eyelids. He's got his membrane eyelid, which is the one on the inside. Then he's got this shelf that kind of protrudes out over it to protect it, which is the one I'm rendering right now. And then above that, he's got this ridge of scales that kind of stick out over it and kind of frame the shape of his skull. So that eye is very, very well protected. I think one problem you might be having, based on what you said you wanted help with in your crit, you said you didn't know how to take it further into detail without breaking what you like about the image. I think another way to translate that sentence is you don't know what details to draw or where to put them because you're not sure how to transition from the making it up phase of the illustration to the referencing and completing, you know, stage of the illustration. I think you came up with a cool drawing of a character whose shapes you liked, and the more detail you put into it, it doesn't seem to work because the detail isn't informed by anything. You're not pulling that detail from a source, so it's just kind of noodling for noodling's sake and rendering something based on nothing. So of course that's going to make it look worse. That's always going to make your image look worse. The second you become aimless and you're just painting for paint's sake and you have no real battle strategy of where you're going to go, that's the fastest way to tank your painting. You'll start making all kinds of weird decisions that just don't make sense. So again, I've got a direction. I'm basically using these 2 animals as a compass. And that's going to sell the rest of it. And again, like I said, if you're not into these two animals, pick another two animals. Whatever you think it's supposed to be. Hey, Brent, who's in my chat right now. Brent is a very accomplished creature designer. So he's actually a good person to have here for this. Anybody listening on demand, I'm talking about Brent Hollowell. So, let's see. Start getting some scales in here. Really set this eye in, make it look like it's, you know, beady and protected. Actually going to switch my brush over to a smoother brush just to do some drawing with. Get some scales in here. So again, if anyone's got anything they'd like me to talk about in particular, questions, concerns. I know everybody's probably watching E3 coverage right now, so I don't expect there to be a huge amount of people watching this particular stream. Maybe later tonight when I crit the other work, but I'm sure right now everybody's watching press conferences and things like that. And that's okay. It's fine. Police cars outside. Something dangerous is happening. Oh boy, Last Guardian. Well, it's okay. We can talk about games in the chat. It's E3. Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to see The Last Guardian. The art direction in those games is always, like, the best thing. Shadow of the Colossus had, like, some of the best art ever. It was just like, so good. There's all kinds of cops outside. I don't know what's going on. Something's happening, guys. Something dangerous. Listen, guys, I'm a grown man. 27 years. I'm large and hairy and strong. And for some reason, I can't get Katy Perry's Dark Horse featuring Juicy J out of my fucking head. Okay? I can't get it out of my head. Can't get it out of my head. It's just a good song. This is what I'm going to talk about because everybody's watching E3. No. Not talking about the comics, Marjorie. I'm talking about Dark Horse featuring Juicy J. The new Katy Perry smash hit. Look, guys, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I like good music. I'm not getting paid to plug Katy Perry. I promise I'm not making any Katy Perry money from doing this live stream. So one thing that's happening as a result of this paint over, because I'm using a horned toad, his eyes are looking a little angrier than you might have wanted them to. That's just because I'm using a horned toad, but you can soften that just by reducing the curve of the brow, wrapping the eye around a bit. Just remember that in all art, basically, the easiest way to put this, I'll just grab a white brush here, zigzags. The more zigzaggy it is, the angrier it's going to appear. The more curved it is, the more peaceful it's going to appear. In all things. So, because this is pointed and it goes like that, it makes it feel like it's an angry eyebrow because it's furrowed and it's got those strong angles. The more you round it out, it'll feel more peaceful if you want it to look peaceful. So, that's all you got to do. I like horned toads because, I'll pull them over here again, they always look angry and judgmental, no matter what you do. They've just got the best faces. They always look like they're disappointed. I wish I could too, Brent. Anybody want to talk about anything fun? Oh. Sorry, just looking at toads. Let's see. Okay. I'm gonna look at some bullfrogs on my other monitor to start rendering the puffed out throat of this dude. So yeah. I'm basically gonna pull this down here. Alright. And let's see. Grab some more reference here. Like this one. This is good. This has some good texture. Some little membrane-y stuff to pull from. Yeah. Yeah. Alright. So I know you're going for a more human nose, so I'm going to round that out a bit and do some scales on it so it still feels like it belongs to this guy. Some reflected light. Remember, when you've got something like this lip catching specular and really, like, you know, getting lit up, surfaces that are facing down towards it are going to catch some bounce light, almost always. Just something to think about. So now I'm gonna grab another layer and start working on the mouth. instead of one big puffy thing, I'm going to do a couple. Because I'm looking at frogs and how their, like, pouch kind of works. So one general big one. That's just kind of a fold, but also a part of the one under it. And I'm going to just start working up some reflected light, some texture. Again, I'm looking at particularly this bullfrog. All this stuff in here. Where it's, you know, when it inflates it'll be more smooth, but when it deflates it's got all these cool little pores and wrinkles and little areas where it's catching light. Have a kind of a seam there in the middle, because it looks like most frogs have those. So basically the big thing to take away from this crit is just when you start moving into detail and texture, just make sure it's informed detail and texture, because I could have taken this crit the opposite way and made this guy look slimy. He didn't read as slimy in the thing, so I went with a more dry toad land animal kind of thing, but if you wanted him to be slimy, all you'd have to do is look at really wet frogs, look at fish and stuff like that, and then just, you know, pull the detail you're going to do from the textures that are on them and try to understand why they look the way that they do. Like, things evolve certain ways because the animal needs to do certain things. So, like, you know, don't just look at an animal and copy it. Try to understand, like, why those things look the way they do, so you can, like, inform your decision making better when you're designing your creature. Because my idea of this dude is that when he takes a deep breath, his throat can, like, triple in size. That's what it feels like to me. So I want to give him this very ribbed, fat kind of throat that looks like, you know, if he wanted to, it could expand very, very big. The ribbing in the throat, these areas, they do that. They act as kind of like supports, the same way that the frames in a blimp are there, so they can expand and retract the, you know, the more gas goes in. It's just sort of like, you know, just think about the design in terms of why things look the way they do on certain animals. It's because they need to do certain things other animals can't do. Pull that stuff in. I'm going to give them some little light catching here. So again, I'll be doing more crits later tonight. I'm going to get off of here in about 15 minutes. And I'm going to have dinner and watch E3 for a bit and see all the pretty stuff that's coming out. Hopefully see some nice art-directed games. I would love to see something that's really cool. And then I'll be back and I'll be doing more paintovers. Just want to break up the edge of this lip a little more. That jump to black is so stark. It's jumping out really hard. I want to save that for kind of the top of the ridge where it's the sharpest and kind of fade it down a bit towards the edges. I know another thing you were having trouble with is taking this to color. That might be what I start with when I come in and do my second batch of crits. I might start laying colors over this and showing you how to take a black and white to color. In general, I'm not saying everybody needs to adhere to this. I'm just talking about my personal preference because I'm doing a paint over, so you should understand, you know, my strengths and weaknesses, what I'm used to doing, that kind of thing. Basically, I usually avoid the grayscale method going into color. I usually work directly color, only because I'm, you know, dichromatically colorblind, and working from gray can kind of muddy up your, not only your values as you start laying colors in, but also the colors themselves. And I just I try to avoid it and work with color as directly as possible. I think you learn more about color that way. I feel like when you're using color adjustment layers on top of a black and white, it's really, really easy to tell that it was just a black and white. But, you know, some people can do it very, very effectively. So if that's what you're into and that's what you want your work to look like, feel free to do it. I'm just saying that it might not look that great when I give you a crit on it, because it's not a method that I use very often. The other thing I didn't ask is, well, I guess I don't really know. It's not. I can't. You're not here, so I can't ask you directly. But why is he wearing a like a human coat? Kind of reminds me of like the Goombas in the Mario movie, the live-action one from the '90s. It's like this weird creature with this weird head, and then he's just wearing like an overcoat. I feel like you should have a name tag down here. Or something. I just don't understand why he's wearing a coat. But if he is going to wear a coat, I'm going to make it so the coat makes sense. And I'm going to have there be buttons and all that good stuff. Best thing you can do really is to sculpt this out of Sculpey. Going back to what I said earlier in the crit, this is such a simple series of forms that you'd really be doing yourself a disservice not to just sculpt it and actually learn from a direct observational study. So hopefully you can see the little differences this is making. And I've still got Katy Perry stuck in my head. Such is life. No, I'm not going to sing it. I only sing for those I'm emotionally closest to. It's too revealing. Let's see. I'll do some overlay layer stuff real quick, just to push the lighting a bit. See if I can. I'm gonna go back to a chalky brush for some texture. Oops. Turn my opacity down. Just to start building up the forms a little more, I'm going to start dropping in some overlay set to a dark gray and a white to just start kind of wrapping the shadows a bit. Yo, good to see you, Indu. So I'm getting close to done with part 1 of this paint over. Like I said, I will be back to do a part 2 later tonight, where I'll be doing some more detailing and then taking it to color, or just, you know, showing the basics of how to take a black and white to color. But I'm going to darken the background just a bit on my overlay layer here, just to make the top of the head really pop some more. All of the grays in the face and the grays in the background felt way too similar in value. He didn't feel like he was jumping out really. So I'm going to try and force him out a bit more by, you know, just using a cheap contrast trick here. Might even push him a little darker in the background. Not all the way to black, just, you know, significantly darker gray. Just so he really jumps out, and so the lighting makes more sense and feels more dramatic. Also going to soften the value shift a bit on a paint overlayer when I'm done. But, yeah, for now, I'm going to go for now. I'll be back later tonight to keep working on this guy. I'm probably going to do some shadow stuff on a multiply and just start sculpting more of a 3D feel out of his head. Because right now there's a lot of light value that's all kind of like leaning towards the same general gray. So, but yeah, I'll be back. I'll be back after a bit on here tonight to do some more with this guy and to keep going. But yeah, so I'll talk to you guys in a bit, and thanks for hanging out if you've been here. And yeah, so I'll do some before and after shots right now, and then I'll come back and finish more of it later. Alright, so I'll talk to you guys in a bit. Thanks.